Zoom functionality.
Yeah, it is.
It's fairly recent, I think. I don't know,
Yeah, you
but
can go Facebook or YouTube, but
YouTube.
you can't do both. They're competing.
Wow. It looks like we're live now, right?
Yep. Okay. All right. So, hi, everybody out there. We are live here with a very special guest, Jordan Thomas, who was our 2018 Promessa awardee. And he has accomplished so much that I'm not going to even try to capture it. I'm going to have him tell you. But first, I'm Angela Simoes. Nice to see everybody again out there in Facebook world. And we're here with Denise, my esteemed co-host.
Yes, and thank you. And we are always happy to do these podcasts. This is the first for me as a Facebook Live on the podcast. I think we haven't done these live, but we always start out with, of course, thanking everyone as Angela did, and saying that it is a pleasure for me. It's actually kind of an honor, a very esteemed honor, to be here with Angela Simões, who is the number one Portuguese American in the Portuguese American universe.
Jordan, Denise is full of flattery. It's kind of it's fun. It keeps us smiling.
Not always. You should ask some people if I'm flattering or not.
So Jordan, I remember when you received your award in 2018 at the gala. Being a mom myself, I could imagine how proud that your parents have been and are with everything that you've accomplished. So, and that's tough to I mean, you've got like dual degrees and Ivy League. I mean, so talk about your path to how you got there and what you're, and then, what you're doing now, kind of how that all kind of flows together.
Absolutely. Well, first, I just want to say, hello, everybody who's watching, and thank you, Angela. Thank you, Denise, for having me. And, thank you. You mentioned the Young Portuguese American Promessa Award, and, just thank you again for that honor. In 2018, I was, I keep, sort of every so often, I write these reflections on what's happened over the past month or past few weeks. And I was going back and reading my reflection on the award.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And I was reminded that I had actually just flown to Oxford to start my Rhodes Scholarship the week prior. And, the award was being given, I believe it was that Saturday, and I was already 3,600 miles away in England. But, to your point, it just meant so much to me. It meant so much to my family, particularly to my grandparents, right, who immigrated to this country over 40 years ago and viewed this as a land of opportunity and as a new start. To win an award like that just meant so much that I remember I actually flew all the way 3,600 miles back from England to Washington, D.C. because I wanted to receive that award in person.
That's amazing.
And then I made it back just in time for the start of classes Monday morning. You'd be proud to hear.
Nice.
But to answer your question and just sort of my background, so as I mentioned, my grandparents on my mother's side are Portuguese. They are from a small town in northern Portugal, Mortosa, which isn't too far out from Aveiro. And on my father's side, I am Black American. My parents were sort of both in Newark, New Jersey, because on the African American side, it's just a very large Black and Latino population in Newark. And then on the Portuguese side, sort of fun fact about Newark is that it's actually the second largest community of Portuguese immigrants in the United States.
Really? Didn't know that.
The first largest is up in the New Bedford, Massachusetts area. But then Newark and New York, we have our own little bustling community of Portuguese immigrants. So my grandparents immigrated from Mortosa to Newark, New Jersey over 40 years ago now, brought my mother when she was, I believe, only 5 years old, and set up roots, and then sort of thankfully met my dad along the lines, and here I was born. But sort of my tale very much ever since birth has been one of balancing and discovering both sides of those cultures and those heritages, and being very proud of being an interracial sort of Black American, Portuguese American, right? And so I grew up in this little, 3-story apartment in the East Ward of Newark, which is where the sort of Portuguese population is largely located. Went to Catholic school for most of my upbringing, and then just, Portuguese culture, right? Quite a Catholic, very faithful religious culture. So I went to a largely Portuguese Catholic school growing up. And then it was for middle school and high school that I actually switched into a public school. And it was actually a largely African-American school. So I went from being perhaps the only, I think, sometimes depending on the year, maybe one of two African Americans in the Portuguese Catholic school, to then being, in the school with 98% African Americans. Wow. So, I always talk about that switch as just being one where, once again, I kind of had to reconcile in myself, like, identity, right? And what does it mean that in many ways I felt at home in both groups, right? I didn't necessarily look like everybody else when I was in the Portuguese school, but I did fit in with them, right? We would speak in Portuguese, and there was kind of a shared culture and shared understanding. And I never felt, I was never a victim of racist epithets or attacks or anything. Like, I very much was welcomed in that community. And then very much fitting in when I switched to the African American school largely, right? And so my life has always kind of been a balance of that. And I think that it's always been that sort of pride and culture and community that I've carried with myself. But beyond sort of just always making me proud of who I was culturally, one thing that my parents just did a phenomenal job of growing up was just encouraging me to just be the best version of myself in every facet, and to apply myself academically. Life wasn't easy growing up. We weren't in the best of circumstances. Like I said, it was a small little apartment. It wasn't the best neighborhood. Circumstances could be tough. But one thing that my dad always told me, my dad's an educator, is he always told me, if you work hard and you get good grades, he said, you can change your life. You can control your future, right? And he said, they can take your car, they can take your house, they can take your job, but they can't take what's up here. They can't take your education. And that just stuck with me as a kid. And, so I was always applying myself growing up. I took that with me pretty much through most of school. The sort of defining moment when people ask me, how did you accomplish what you accomplished, right? Is the defining moment for me actually was, generally doing well because I believed you were supposed to, right? Because mom and dad told me you were supposed to. And it only switched. I only flipped the switch in my head where I started doing it for me, which I always tell people, you have to believe it. You have to want it, right? It has to come from you. That only happened when I switched schools and I got to the middle school now, and it was a magnet school. So they talked about, this is where the best meets the best. There was sort of a culture of excellence and applying yourself to be a leader, right? So that 7th grade year when I first got there, that just kind of stuck with me. It was like, wow, this is where you go to apply yourself, and I did very well. And everybody just kind of looked at me as like the runaway valedictorian for 8th grade, right? And it's like we were still like maybe midway through 7th grade, and that's how well I was doing. Wow. And as these things tend to do, it kind of got to my head a bit. And sure enough, we started 8th grade, and I just thought I had it in the bag, right? And I just thought valedictorian, like, this is my year. But what actually ended up happening was I started slacking. And I thought that it just kind of came naturally to me, so I didn't have to apply myself. And, people find it hard to believe now, but I was slacking off my homework, messing around, just not doing what I was supposed to do. And sure enough, what ended up happening that year is we get to the spring when they announce who's valedictorian, and it's coming on the intercom. They're making the announcement, and everybody just kind of looking at me because it's obviously Jordan, right? And sure enough, they say valedictorian, and I don't hear my name, right? And everybody's just looking. There's kind of like a tension in the room. It's like, okay. and then they say salutatorian, and I don't hear my name, and it's like, I fell from first place at the end of 7th grade because I was messing around and not taking care of my business. I fell all the way down at 3rd place, right? You don't get recognized. There is no award. And I had to live with that. I had to very much to sort of look at myself in the mirror that evening. I went home and I had to come to terms with the fact that I wanted it. It's not that I didn't want to be valedictorian. I wanted to. I didn't put in the work. I didn't follow up and do what I was supposed to do. And so I asked myself that evening, looking in the mirror, here I am, a 13-year-old, eighth grader, right? And I went home and I looked myself in the mirror and I said, what type of person do I want to be in the world? Do I want to be the type of person who's okay with just being bright? I mean, I still finished in third place, right? Some people are like, okay, look, why are you even complaining, right? You did really well. But I knew I didn't do as well as I should have and could have. And so I asked myself, what type of person do I want to be? And I said, I want to be the type of person who always gives 110%. I don't want to be comfortable with just being good enough. I am going to give every inch and every bit of what I have in my heart and soul to whatever I set my mind to. And I will not be the reason. My lack of effort will never again be the reason why something doesn't happen. It will have to come from forces beyond myself that I don't make something that I want to happen.
What an incredible lesson to learn at a young age, I will say. And kudos to you, and clearly you're mature beyond your years, because at 13 to be able to even ask yourself that question, I think is, I mean, I personally don't know a lot of 13-year-olds that you have the astuteness or maybe that self-aware to ask themselves that question. That, they're still just
and so Jordan, you took that mentality, that reflection that you had at a very tender age, and I would agree, obviously, with Angela, to high school. And so how did that turn out?
And that was really when things changed. I sort of viewed that moment, that mentality that I set in myself, I took it to heart. And I never looked back. I actually would end up graduating with what at the time was the highest GPA in my high school's history. I, from the very first semester of high school, pretty much through the end, was in that valedictorian spot, because I was hungry. I had this desire, and it wasn't. People ask me, "Are you competitive?" Right? Like, did you feel like you were offended that you weren't valedictorian because you thought that you were better than the person who was valedictorian and who was salutatorian in 8th grade? And did you feel like when you got to high school you had to prove yourself that you were better than everybody? No, I'm not competitive in sort of an external facing way. I'm competitive in an internal facing way, right? So I was holding myself to task in high school. I wasn't running a race against everybody else. I was running a race with myself of trying to see, how high can my GPA get, because I wanted to show that I can do it for me, right? And so that was kind of the mentality I took. Thankfully, I did end up being valedictorian, as I mentioned, in high school, and also just so fortunate. I was admitted to Princeton, Harvard, and Yale in my senior year, and had a bit of a decision to make. And my parents, they'll tell you now, one of the most stressful moments of their lives is we finished all of our site visits. We went to see the schools, and as a kid coming from Newark, right? I mean, I felt like I was in like a fairy tale visiting these campuses, and it was just so surreal. And for a while, I thought I was going to be a Princeton kid because I had done 2 summer programs on Princeton's campus, which were quite formative for me, and I just loved it. It was, the suburban sort of fairyland and absolutely gorgeous. And so Princeton made a lot of sense, but then I saw Harvard, and I saw Harvard after I had seen Princeton. They were very smart in how they sequenced their admitted students weekends, because Harvard came last. And then I had all these whispers in my ear of, oh, you like Princeton for that reason? Well, let me tell you, Harvard's better because of this. And you like Princeton for that? Well, Harvard's got that. And so I actually waited until I think maybe I had 10 minutes before the decision deadline to submit my final decision that I was going to go to Princeton. And my parents were in the other room wondering, like, what happens if the site crashes and you can't submit your decision? So they were quite stressed. But I made the decision to go to Princeton, and then the narrative changed, right? So again, now it was not as Jordan, is he hungry enough? Is he going to apply himself? But it was now a question of just pure ability. In that, everybody was saying, well, you were a big fish in a small pond here in this little high school in Newark, but now you're going to go to Princeton. I mean, you're pulling the best of the best from across the world. You're going to be a small fish in a big pond. Are you ready for that? And again, this was just sort of my mentality and my faith in myself, right? As I said, no. I said, that's a false dichotomy, right? It's not a big fish, small pond, small fish in a big pond. I said, I'm going to be a big fish in a big pond. I'm going to go. And I don't care, if where they come from, what their background is. They may have more resources than me, and many of them did. They may have, just a stronger sort of foundation than I have, whatever it is. But they will not outwork me, right? I will go and I will give 110% to making sure that I do what I need to do to try to be the best version of myself at a place like Princeton. And again, I took that mentality and just worked hard. It wasn't always easy, but ran away with it, and very thankfully ended up graduating Princeton, with highest honors, and was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship, which is one of the most prestigious scholarships for international study in the world. I was one of 100 people across the world selected for this scholarship. Wow. And, something I take great pride in is I was the first Rhodes Scholar in the history of the Newark public school system.
Wow. So, that's amazing.
Yeah, we had one person from the city of Newark prior to me, but they had gone to school outside of the public school system. And so I was the first sort of homebred, straight through the public schools, Rhodes Scholar in the city of Newark. And it was just such a joyous moment, joyous occasion. But that was, again, it was just my sheer desire to not let myself down and to always apply myself. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to be the hardest worker in the room. I don't care how challenging it is. You might be more talented than me. Again, you might have a better foundation, better resources, more well endowed. You will not outwork me.
I have a question when you, if I may, Angela.
Yeah.
So you said that the middle schools, the 7th and 8th grade, it was a magnet school. The high school, was that kind of a school as well? Was it a magnet school, or was it something just, how did you transition from that to tell us a little bit about the high school itself? Because it seems like it was a school that also, although in the public system, but something that unfortunately there's different tiers in the public system, as you well know. So tell us a little bit about how that high school prepared you for such a competitive field, within the Ivy League.
Yeah, so I was actually in a funny position because my middle school was also my high school. And so the high school had a 7th and 8th grade component to it. So it was, still that same magnet school environment. That idea of, this is where the best meets the best. And then the also very important thing about my high school is that it very much has this mentality around pay it forward. So it's not only where the best meets the best, but we actually have written on some of the walls, pay it forward. And it's this idea of, trying to cultivate yourself academically and also personally as a leader, but with the mentality that everything you're doing, you are in some way going to give forth to others, right? You are going to live a life that is not only inward facing for yourself, but in some way, and I love the idea of you're giving back and paying it forward, because I kind of view those differently, right? I love to give back to my community in Newark, but at the same time, I like to pay it forward to other communities and other people in need. So I think they're kind of two sides of the same coin. But that was that same sort of middle school to high school environment that I was being cultivated in, and those lessons that were being imbued in me.
And so from Princeton, you went to Oxford.
Exactly, right. And so the Rhodes Scholarship, many people have heard of it, or heard of a few Rhodes Scholars, Rachel Maddow on MSNBC.
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
That's kind of one of the most famous ones. People in politics keep on saying Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton. That's the one that many people know of. Yeah. So many people know of this scholarship. They don't know what it actually is. And so what it is, it's a fully funded scholarship to study at the University of Oxford in England. And any degree that's on offer at the university is available to you. And so you can study politics, you can study global governance, international relations, you can study the history of medicine. Every degree is open to you. But beyond being a sort of scholarship and a funded degree in itself, what it is, it's a network of leaders who are devoted to, quote, fighting the world's fight. It truly values and selects a group of 100 every year, individuals who are devoted to somehow creating change. And that idea of fighting the world's fight is broadly defined. And so, some people believe that they're fighting, it depends on what sort of portion of the world's fight you're fighting, right? So for some people, it's some sort of academic pursuit, right? They believe that they're adding to thoughtful discourse on an issue and critical theory. And so they pursue a path of academia. For other people, which is sort of more of my path, it's a little bit more of governance and sort of community work, law, policy. For other people, it can be more business. So it's really, or medicine, right? We also have a number of doctors. And so, but it's this wonderful network of 100 people every year studying at the University of Oxford together, studying different degrees, but with that same desire, that same devotion to creating change in some way.
And they obviously come from different parts of the world.
Absolutely. It's a global scholarship. So we have 32 U.S. Rhodes Scholars every year. So I was one of 32 in the 2018 cohort. But then the other scholars come from across the world, right? And there are different numbers from each constituency. So you can get 11 from Canada, 4 from India, 8 from South Africa. And the breadth is just amazing. We have scholars from Germany, we have scholars from Australia, we have scholars from Zimbabwe, Zambia. I mean, it's truly just a phenomenal network.
So is that something that you apply for, or does your school counselor say, hey, I think you would have a good chance of qualifying for this? Like, what's the process for that? I'm just curious. Yeah.
It's you definitely apply for it, and it's to this day the most rigorous application process I've ever gone through. But it's also mixed, right? Like most of these larger schools, like a Princeton and a Harvard, like these schools that, and larger not in size, but just in terms of their capacity, their endowment for having these offices. They have fellowship offices where they staff it with individuals who are advising students on applying for these types of scholarships, whether it's a Rhodes Scholarship or a Marshall Scholarship or a Fulbright or a Mitchell, some of these that you might have heard of. And so I was very thankful that, again, I came from Newark, and it's something that I'm proud of, but there also were just sort of gaps in information, right? And one thing that I talk about, because I'm very passionate about education and sort of educational opportunity and access, is you're running a race from a very early age, and some people are getting way further ahead in that race of experience and exposure than others, and information and knowledge than others as they get there, so that when you actually finally arrive at Princeton, you're not on the same stepping stone of where you're coming from. And so that was one thing, just one disadvantage that I had, is I had never heard of fellowships of any kind, right? I didn't really know what a Rhodes Scholarship was. I didn't know what a Fulbright was. And I was very thankful that I had done well my first year at Princeton, so that it was actually somebody from the fellowships office who kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think that you should apply to what at the time was a fellowship for freshmen. It was called the Fulbright US UK Summer Institute, and it was going to fund 5 weeks of study at a university in England, and an exposure to a critical topic. And so they told me, you're doing really well academically, you're in all these awesome extracurriculars, I think you should apply for this fellowship. And then, of course, right, there's a whole question of like, well, what is a fellowship? What is this Fulbright thing? I didn't know any of that stuff, right? Again, it's that I was a little bit further behind in the race of just knowing what to do when you get to a place like a Princeton. But thankfully, they guided me, they advised me, and I ended up being accepted to that Fulbright Summer Institute. And that was kind of my first exposure to just like what these fellowships are, what it was like to study abroad. It's kind of my first major experience out of the country. I had young age, I'd gone to Portugal with my family, but this was kind of like my first time on my own being exposed to the UK. So I credit that exposure to that Fulbright program for why I would then apply to the Rhodes, but also just, like you mentioned, the fellowships office is so much of the reason why I applied to the Rhodes, because I just didn't know that's what a person does,
Right.
Yeah.
That's actually a great point to bring up. And I think something that we can address in actually a whole series of other webinars, which is educational processes in terms of how do you apply for a scholarship? What is a fellowship, and how do you apply for that? And what are the different opportunities available? And what is financial aid, and what are the different options? I mean, there's so many things when it comes to going to university, that I think there's still a lot of questions in our community, because I think we still have a lot of first generation going to college, right? The parents didn't go to college, or, things like that. So I think it's a great point that you raise up, that you just didn't know. And maybe that's something that we can work on fixing, letting more people know.
I wanted to ask you that, if we should just take a couple of minutes on that, Angela, which is, Jordan, going to Princeton is in itself an experience, obviously. And, but it's, I think that, how would you rate going to Princeton, but also these other opportunities that came about from going to Princeton? And I think students can get them from other universities as well. Obviously, Ivy League is a different, to a class of its own, but even some of the state colleges and some of the university systems throughout any public or private university throughout the United States. How much of your academic and graduating from Princeton and of course the Rhodes Scholar, but how much of this was just what you did in a classroom versus these opportunities that took you? Because sometimes as Americans, one of our lacking is that we think, okay, well, we get you get into a degree from a 4-year college and boom, I got that certificate, I have that piece of paper, and now I can do whatever. But it's not only no longer the piece of paper, it's also where you get it. And it's also the experiences that you get by going to study abroad, whether it's even just one simple 6-week stint in Portugal or Brazil or the UK or anywhere else. How much of these things that you did that, going to Princeton afforded you have shaped who you are today?
I owe so much to my experience at Princeton. And that's a great point that you mentioned, is it's so much of, I love that you use the word experience, right? Because it's not just the degree, right? I studied public and international affairs, but so much of what Princeton did to shape me, and it shaped my mind in so many ways, just the way that I view the world. I loved all of the information that I was consuming in the classroom, and I've always been that person who just wanted to learn more, and I felt like with every class that I took, there was just a whole new world that was opening to me. And so, obviously the quality of instruction and just academic offerings at Princeton was phenomenal. But so much of it was the entire experience, right? It was the conversations with the other students, making friends with, Princeton in itself is a very international place. So, coming from a place like Newark, where my exposure had largely been Portuguese and then African-American Latino, to then I get to Princeton, it's like all of a sudden, I'm meeting friends from Rwanda, I'm meeting friends from Zimbabwe, from China, from Australia, and just getting a chance to know them and understanding, how they viewed the world and how it was different from me, and even domestically, right? Like meeting people from Wyoming or meeting people from Texas. One of my most developmental experiences at Princeton was my freshman year. My roommate was an Asian American from San Francisco. And so, here he is coming from the entirely opposite coast, and just growing up in a much different context. He's very religious, a little conservative, whereas I was quite liberal. And so it was just such a different experience, and we had to learn how to engage with each other and share space, share very close, intimate living space as roommates, despite coming from such different backgrounds and viewing the world differently, right? It's like, how do you see somebody, and how do you understand them, and how do you engage them in ways that are respectful, but then also learn from them, right? I learned a lot from my roommate, and he shaped my views in ways that were within reason, right? Didn't make me a conservative, but he allowed me to, when in reason, say, wow, okay, I see why you believe that. You have a good point. So it was the breadth of the students that I was being exposed to, just the nature of the students. But then to your point, it's the opportunity, right? These universities like Princeton, like Harvard, And, you know, it's not only the Ivy League, right? I'm very careful not to be elitist in that. There are many schools outside of the Ivy League that also just do phenomenal things for their students, whether, you know, it's a Georgetown or it's a University of California, Berkeley, right? I mean, just it's these schools that have the resources and the opportunities and the networks to expose you to so much. So I think about after that freshman year where I studied at the University of Bristol in England, and that was just an eye-opening experience. That next year, because of the resources available at Princeton and the network of Princeton, I from June to July, so 8 weeks, did an internship at a law firm in Lisbon, Portugal. You know, was working in Portuguese, living day to day in Portugal, and took the opportunity to see Portugal. Right, every weekend I was in a different place. I saw more of Portugal than my grandparents have seen in their time living there. I mean, you know, from Nazaré to Alcobaça to Batalha to Óbidos.
Very cool.
I saw it all. And loved it. And then hopped on a plane immediately after being in Portugal. To your point, you mentioned Brazil. I was volunteering at the 2016 Rio Olympics. And I was engaging in humanitarian service projects in the favela neighborhood. So we were painting murals, we were planting gardens, but then we had a partnership with the International Olympic Committee where they would give us extra tickets when, you know, they had all these events going on, rugby, ping pong, they wouldn't sell them all. And so all the extras they would give to these organizations like ours, where we can take the children from the favelas to go see the games and expose them to that. And so, but obviously we were seeing them ourselves too, right? So it's kind of a cool win.
Sure.
But right, that was what Princeton offered. And then the next summer I was at, this was the, you know, Trump gets elected that fall in 2016. So then that summer of 2017, I was actually interning at the Department of Education through this scholarship that I had won through Princeton. It was called the Scholars in the Nation Service Initiative, which gives you a summer internship opportunity at a government agency of your choice. So, you know, kind of a funny thing here is I get that scholarship in October and Trump wins in November. So we all applied to the scholarship, not knowing which president we were going to be under and you know, just wanting to serve and just wanting to learn. So that summer in itself was one of the most hectic, but just so wonderful developmental learning opportunities of my life. And all of that, right, is that's Princeton's opportunity network that other schools, you know, some of them can offer, but not all can. And so I always tell people, and so much of why I encourage you to always challenge yourself, apply to these Ivy Leagues and these other phenomenal schools outside of the Ivy League, rather than just saying, oh, it's just a degree, is because it's not. You're going to get a degree, and that's phenomenal. And I'm just glad that people are applying to college and want a degree. But, you know, what concerns me, and one thing that I'm always so passionate about when I go back and I talk to students in Newark, is those students who can get into the top schools but don't even apply because they don't you know, they don't believe that they're good enough, right? Or they're worried about, you know, not being able to perform when they get there. And that's something, it's called undermatching. It's a trend where students who typically could get into a school based on their GPA, SATs, etc., do not even apply, and they apply to, you know, I hate to use the term lesser tier because I just don't view schools that way, but they, at least as it's ranked, they apply to a lower ranked school, and simply because, you know, again, they didn't feel that they would fit in, or they were worried that they get rejected with this. Encourage people, you have to believe in yourself, you have to apply, because it's a whole experience, it's an opportunity network that you get at these schools.
So Jordan, I have a direct experience with exactly what you talked about. In high school, my counselor basically said, you don't really have a good GPA, so just apply to your local state school. I mean, she actually discouraged me from applying to other schools. Well, I didn't listen to her, and I applied to a bunch of other schools. I got in everywhere I applied, and I ended up going to University of San Francisco, and it was the best experience of my life. So you bring up an excellent point, and I want to be cognizant of time. We've got about 15 minutes left, if that.
Angela, I just want to mention that it's interesting that it still applies to all different generations, because, you know, kind of we're a little bit different generation, obviously. there's a big difference between your age and mine. It's almost 62, and Angela's kind of in the middle there. But it's gone. I thought it would be gone with my generation, because when I went to high school, I wanted to go to college, and this counselor told me that since I was in rural county in California, and I could talk, so that I should maybe consider going into selling hay. Literally, the counselor said,
Wow.
you should be a hay salesman, because there's lots of Portuguese in the agricultural and dairy industry, and since you can speak both languages, you shouldn't be an educator. You should be a hay salesman, which is okay. I mean, a couple of cousins actually are, and are probably more successful than I am financially. But like Angela said, I think we are cognizant of time. So, and you're wonderful. We could just ask you a question. You go for 20 minutes. Your dream come true to anybody in interviews. But I think what Angela wanted to go into is what your work right now in Newark. So basically, Angela.
Yeah, well, but then I mean, I feel it's actually even more important to talk about your perspective on what's happening in our country today and the world, really, given not only the pandemic, but which has affected the economy, and then of course we have the social justice tensions and issues that have been raised. So, pulling from all of your experience, having gone from a predominantly Portuguese school to a predominantly African-American school, and then getting into the Ivy Leagues and and you have become a citizen of the world, essentially, right? What's your thought on what's happening now? And is there a message you have for the Portuguese community on how do we move forward, and how do we start to really have these tough conversations and address these issues?
Yeah, I mean, we are living in truly an unprecedented time. I mean, we've seen financial crises, we've seen pandemics. We keep looking toward the 1918 Spanish flu for lessons on how to navigate this moment, and we've seen civil unrest around racial injustice and systemic racism. But 2020 just said, okay, take all of those and we're gonna throw it all at you, right? It's like, okay, hold my beer, right? Take this. But it's just, it truly is an incredible moment. It's visceral in every conversation with somebody. There's some way that it comes up, right? You can't avoid it. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's an exhausting thing. It almost feels like you can't unplug from it, no matter what the notifications are on your phone, or you go on to Facebook, you go on to Instagram, you go on to Twitter. I was talking to somebody recently, and they said, I used to love Instagram because it was just pictures and it was friendly and it was like a fairy tale escape, and now it's like even the pictures are political. But I think it's beautiful, if I'm being honest, because it forces us there's always a need for balance. So I hope that people are, making time for self-care and unplugging and truly making time to refresh when they need that space and that energy recharge. But I also love that this is a moment when we are being forced to grapple with these issues, and we can't avoid them anymore, right? You can't just say, oh, that's that person's issue anymore. You can't just say, oh, well, Black Lives Matter, that's Black people's issue anymore, right? It's like, well, you need to take a stance. You need to decide how you feel about this. And again, I go back to my freshman year with that individual, my roommate, is like, you need to at least, even if you disagree with some of the stances that are being taken on everything that's happening now, at least try to understand what's happening now and formulate an opinion on it. And that's, I think, one of the most powerful things you can do is just figure out where you lie, because that's where action stems from. You first need to have thoughts and opinions and sensibilities and values on something to then take action based on that. And I think it's so powerful how we see that mobilization, that galvanization of action around so many different things right now. When we do see people taking very strong stances around trying to equalize opportunity, trying to dismantle systems of oppression and injustice. And again, I say that not only in the context of Black Lives Matter, but we see it extending, right? We see now there's been a sort of recent string of anti-Semitic messages by certain celebrities that have been very rightly criticized and condemned, right? And I just love that there's a certain level of solidarity right now across movements that we haven't always seen. That being said, I'm talking now about some of these sort of identity, sort of racial civil unrest issues, but there is a pandemic going on, and that I'm a little less sort of optimistic or peachy in how I view it. I love the progress that's being fought on racial fronts right now, and ethnic fronts. I'm a little concerned by what we see happening with the pandemic response for a number of reasons, right? I mean, the U.S. now has become the only developed nation that is still rising in cases, and our mortality rate is getting out of control. There is a lack of sort of central coordination around how to proceed from here. That concerns me. It breaks my heart to see how even something like mask wearing has become a political statement in many ways, when you would hope that it would kind of just be based on the science, something that we can agree. We're helping each other, right? Right? So we're doing this to save each other's lives. We're doing it. You love your family. Well, wear a mask because you would hope that somebody else would wear a mask to help your family as well. And again, I'm sort of showing my own politics on the pandemic's response right now, and how I'm talking about it. But one thing that I do believe is that we as a people, and as a country, which is why, as much as I may criticize certain aspects of this country, and I really devoted my life to trying to improve conditions for those who have been left behind in many ways, I still love this country, is because there is a spirit, there is a sort of a tendency to, over time, try to grapple with these difficult things and to push forward. And so I see that happening now on the racial front. We still have a long way to go. I'm a little concerned by how it's happening on the pandemic front, but I know we're going to get through it. And I simply hope that we'll get through it and we'll snap into our senses sooner rather than later, so that we don't have any more unnecessary people dying at the hands of the terrible virus. But, as somebody who's been working on the response in Newark and in New Jersey, I can tell you, I'm just inspired every day by the spirit of people mobilizing around trying to combat this thing, whether it's frontline health workers, people just day and night sacrificing so much to be in the hospitals, or to go and, first on the scene EMTs and things like that, to people who are, sort of more in my position, advising cities and working with cities on setting up testing sites and volunteering time around contact tracing and things like that. I mean, it's absolutely inspiring seeing people just work day and night like crazy out of the goodness of their hearts. So that's one thing that I am very rosy and very optimistic on, is it's shown me again, I believe strongly in just people. I love people, because people show me time and time again that we are beautiful in so many ways. And I see that happening now with the pandemic.
Do you think that, one of the concerns with the pandemic also, some of the things that you mentioned about racial injustice, we're seeing it in the pandemic, in the number of people of color that are being much more affected by the pandemic, and it's because of the structures that we've put in place in society.
Absolutely. And you see the way that the disparities for so many years in health and in education and et cetera that have plagued, Black and Latino groups. We now see them all compounded in the way that the pandemic is killing those individuals at disproportionate rates. So it's just another way in which all of this gets linked together. They're not separate. The financial crisis right now is very much to the health crisis, and the racial injustice, civil unrest is very much linked to both of those as well.
And as a Portuguese American, Portuguese, African American, you have all the different ethnicities and these different experiences. Sometimes we in the Portuguese community nationally, not just here in California or there in New Jersey but throughout the U.S. when in large pockets of Portuguese Americans, California, Newark, New York, and of course the New England states. Sometimes we hear, what's going on in the African American community, whether it be with Black Lives Matter or other issues as well, or what we hear, with the immigration in the Hispanic community as well, in the Latinx community. So we hear this, and sometimes we say, well, it's not our issue, it's really not us. But you've touched on a topic there that there are these different communities that are coming forth that it may not directly affect them, but it does indirectly affect. And part of it because we are American, whether we're of Portuguese background or African background, or you're, of Latin background, where there's something that bonds us together, which being, the American experience. So how do you feel, and what would you say to folks that say, well, this is not really a Portuguese thing, so let's not even talk about this?
I tell them it is, right. And there's that classic sort of tale where it's like they came for the Jewish and it wasn't me, so I stayed silent. And they came for the Latinx and it wasn't me, so I stayed silent. And then they came for me, but there was nobody else to help me.
Left, yeah.
Right. And so, right, there's nobody left. And so I truly believe that statement, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, because we've seen it happen, particularly in the last 4 years, right? It's an issue by issue case. So we thought that very early on it was going to be attacks on immigration and immigrants, and it was. And then it became an attack on feminist issues and on women's rights, and then it became an attack on Black lives. And so it's marginalized groups and individuals fighting for access and opportunity in one way or another. There's a need for solidarity, because we are all fighting for that same ideal of just wanting to be at the table on equal footing. And whether your angle of how you view your path to being on equal is different. So perhaps, Portuguese Americans aren't being targeted disproportionately by police, right? That's sort of African Americans sort of angles to how we get on equal footing. Portuguese Americans have their own set of issues and social causes that they're passionate about, and things that we need to grapple with. You can only hope that we all sort of link arms, helping each other get there, right? Whatever it is that you need, I'm going to lend a hand. That may not be what I need, but I trust that I'll lend a hand to you and you'll lend a hand to me on what I need. And it resonates deeply with me, because I kind of am on both sides. I am Portuguese American and Black American. So, I can't avoid what's happening. And I always talk, very passionately about one thing we need to recognize in the Portuguese community is we're not all just one sort of, ethnic group of people, right? There are interracial people like me. And what does it mean to say, well, that's not my issue? Well, does that mean that I'm not a valued member of the community and that you don't care about the causes that affect me and who I am, right? And so it's one thing is I love our Portuguese community, but I do think that there is almost a sort of homogenization in our minds sometimes of what it means to be Portuguese American. And we almost kind of forget like that pan-Lusophone group, right? Like what about like mixed Brazilian Portuguese people who tend to have darker skin and may be subject to injustice, or the African nations, right, may be mixed with our Portuguese groups, and right, and then we're subject to all sorts of injustice. So I always encourage Portuguese to kind of step out of that homogenized, like this is what a Portuguese American is, and just recognize that there's a lot of us out there like me who feel very strongly Portuguese American but don't look like the others.
Well, and on that note, I think we could actually have another webinar discussion just on that topic. And so perhaps we'll have you back, Jordan, as well as a couple other guests to explore that further, because you are absolutely right. And I think it's a really important topic to address.
I think so.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we've reached our time. We've gone through almost a whole hour, and this has been phenomenal. Jordan, I know that we're going to be working together in the future. So hopefully this is just the first time that our members in our community will be seeing you and hearing from you. And we're very excited to be doing that. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for those who are listening on the podcast. And if you are listening on the podcast, please hit subscribe if you haven't already. Share the podcast with friends and family. It's free. It's a resource. It's a conversation that needs to be had, and we need to have as many people engaged in this conversation as possible. So please do that, and write us a review. If you have a minute or two, take time to write us a review on iTunes. That will help more people find this podcast. And so just thank you, Jordan, so much for your time. This has been a really awesome conversation.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise.
If I can just add, thanks, Jordan, and thanks for being inspiring. It is
Yes.
we sometimes we look forward, and when we get to my age, we become a little bit cynical, and there's a little bit, and there's some virtues in a little bit of cynicism. However, to see someone, obviously as intelligent you are, but also as caring and empathetic, and that's some of the things that sometimes we lack in the
And at your age,
in the world
frankly.
today, which is empathy. And so
Yeah.
thanks for the wise words, thanks for the inspiration, but above all, thanks for being who you are.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate the kind words, and so thankful to be on this podcast, and look forward to working with both of you on a number of issues moving forward.
Thank you. Appreciate
Excellent. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
it. Thank you so much. Take
Thank
care.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.